Hello, today I am talking with Pablo Lambrechts, who is an architect with over 30 years of experience and a rare gift for blending design thinking with emotional intelligence. He's worked on everything from sustainable housing and future-facing schools to Google's HQ. But what makes his work so powerful is his sensitivity to light, to proportion, to how a space can feel. In this episode, we talk about what it really means to design spaces that don't just look good, but feel like home. We explore biophilia, the value of hand drawing, and how our buildings can better reflect our biology. It's a conversation about design with heart and why thoughtful architecture might be one of the most human things we can do. Warm, honest, and full of insight, Pablo brings a quiet depth that I think you'll really enjoy. Let's get into it. Okay, so Pablo, welcome. Episode number 2. Thank you very much for being our second guest. So, do a little bit of introduction. I'll do that for you because often it can be a little bit blushing if you do it yourself. But I mean, you've got an amazing pedigree. I was reading through the projects you've done, which we'll obviously get into in a moment. But Pablo Lambrechts has over 30 years of experience as a principal senior architect, specialising in conservation and sustainability. His portfolio includes iconic projects such as the Google HQ in King's Cross, upon many others, which we'll discuss in various bits and bobs later on. So Pablo's upbringing in a construction family business, combined with 3 decades of practicing as a commercial architect, informs his deep understanding of buildability issues, enabling him to advocate effectively for health and safety beyond regulatory compliance. So Pablo, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So just to kick off, do you want to give us an overview of L Plus Architects? What do you guys do? What sets you apart from other firms? Give us an idea.
Well, yeah, so our approach to architecture is basically, as I call it, deeply human-centered or client-focused, prioritizing well-being as an outcome for the design. So we are focusing on the outputs rather than the inputs from the onset. We work with our clients on that way. So our approach to architecture is contextual in general. So we are respecting the local vernacular, the historic context, the social context, and so on. Even the collective memory of a location. But then we want to go a bit further than that. So we want to do architecture is more responsive to the environment rather than being passive and just simply contextual. So we formed the company, the practice with Lindsay, my wife. She's a landscape architect and garden designer. At some point, we wanted to share our desire to collaborate, and Lindsay introduced me to the concept of Japanese garden design called shake, or the art of borrowing views from the surrounding landscape to inform the projects, either the architectural or landscape projects. And I found that extremely interesting. So we got together in the sense to work together, and biophilic design approach was something we have in common, we share in common as an interest.
So you both had a kind of, I guess, a general interest in how nature, through Lindsay's expertise,
That's
I guess,
right.
initially. Did she kind of show you biophilic design? Did you already instinctively do it? Because obviously, I've looked at your projects, as I mentioned earlier, they're awesome. Some of them towards the end of the big list aren't hinting biophilic design, but did Lindsay suddenly go, okay, look at this, it's amazing, it can do this and that? Or how did it suddenly come into your mind?
I suppose, I can say yes. I think that she introduced me to biophilic design in a way, but at the same time, I was already working on organic architecture and how the built environment has an impact on the performance and the productivity and well-being of the users. So I think both had a confluence of interest at some point that made us get together on a form of practice and practice together. And we've been doing that for 6 years now. We very much enjoy it.
So how did you get into architecture? Was there a moment where you're like, this is it, this is what I'm going to do with my life?
So basically, I grew up surrounded by construction. My family has been in the industry for generations. So I'm part of a third generation of that family business. So I was exposed to the construction process and the design process at real time. basically the company employed a lot of designers. So I could see the designs and I could see how they got built soon after. And that had a huge impact on me. And it was very exciting to see that. That informed my decision to get into the industry. At the beginning, I was more interested in the construction stages or phases of the process. And little by little, as a gradual shift, I moved on to the design side things. So at university, yes, there were a lot of instances that really reinforced my passion and pushed me to go deeper into the field. At the School of Architecture in Montevideo, the students are grouped in small workshops, and then each workshop has a different distinctive view on architecture. But the idea is to encourage discussions and debate, which is very efficient and effective in that way.
Was there a lot of like organic design modules or biology or psychology when you were doing this training? Was there
the workshop I was part of? It was specialized on organic architecture, as we call it,
which is quite rare, from what I understand. Speaking to other architects,
it was influenced by this Finnish architect called Alvar Aalto, who is a pioneers in organic architecture, together with Frank Lloyd Wright in America. So our workshop was heavily influenced by that approach. And then
what sort of, I mean, just describe organic architecture. I mean, is that kind of is that pre? Well, I guess it'd be post biophilic design. So biophilic design was 1970s, organic wellness design.
But then it was pre a lot. It was from I'm talking about the 50s and 60s. That's what. But or even before then, but Frank Lloyd Wright has been practicing since earliest 20th century. The thing is, I think we all have been incorporating biophilic design. Even the classic Greeks, they've been incorporating the biophilic design principles by intuition, by empiric approach to say things work this way, let's apply it later on another project, and it still works. So I think that's so it hasn't been structured as biophilic design, but all the principles.
Intuitively, we know that this is a design that works.
The idea of organic architecture is to attach it completely to the surrounding natural space and using natural materials and using approaches that stimulate the contact with nature in the building. So that's more or less what it is.
So how because it's an ever-growing term, biophilic design. During lockdown in particular, people would take photos of plants in their kitchen and go, hashtag biophilic design. It's like, you're kind of getting it, but there's so much more to it. So how would you describe biophilic design? Like the work in which you implement biophilic design strategies, which sort of aspects of design do you apply that would make it biophilic design that would be different to your standard design that an architect might do?
Well, I would say the biophilic design principles for what we do, they are embedded in everything we do. Even the design process itself, we're trying to assimilate it to natural systems or processes because it's an iterative process, trial and error, combining elements, evolving, and to achieve something sometimes it's completely unexpected to what we started. So it is client-focused, human-centered, and natural in a way. So it's about the process, not about the final product, I would say.
So I mean, one of the big projects that obviously stands out on your long list of impressive builds is the Google HQ in King's Cross. I mean, that place is wild, and a lot of people don't know that Google had a huge part to play in biophilic design. They were the ones that sort of financed Terrapin's 15 patterns of biophilic design. They sort of tried to work out how to get improved performance of their employees through interior design. So was that project an influence on you moving towards biophilic design, or was it you were applying your education from Finnish architectural
design? So I was already applying what I've learned in a way, trying to apply it even further. But the beauty of working with an educated client is they understand, and you can incorporate all of those parameters early on, even on the early brief. And that's when you maximize the output of the results of such a an amazing approach.
Can you give a couple of examples of the kind of thing that, like, when you're putting a building together?
Basically we worked together with the landscape architect designing Pancras Square at the time. So the idea was to pull the square into the space and have this idea of surprise effect. So when you enter the building, it's a semi-open,
which is a hormonal lift, which is part of that biophilic.
That's right. It's a part of it. It's to have the sense of awe, and but at the same time combine it and control it and have a sense of sort of coziness and being protective. So I will explain you how it works. So basically, when you come into the space, you don't expect it, and you have this sense of awe about this massive cathedral-like space.
Which is the 15th pattern of Terrapin's 15th.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then the idea was so you look up, there's a huge, massive roof light. You can see the sky, but it's crisscrossed by bridges. And then you have it's flanked by these two massive sort of panoramic lifts on both sides. So very high tech. And so all of this complexity adds a lot of interest and a sense of fascination, basically, with the space. We're talking about a 13-story high building. At low level, at ground floor, we have some sitting areas, and you have thought that sitting, in the middle of that big space is not very inviting, but it does work. Basically, we clad all the surrounding walls by these full height slabs of marble brought directly from Turkey. We want to source it directly there. We brought them here, and it's a pattern which is a vertical stripes of black and white. Amazing marble, and then almost
makes it look even taller then when it's
but it replicates what is the sensation of reeds or shrubs, basically in the bush type of thing. So it gives you the sense of calmness amidst that massive space. So the trick really works. So we were all very sort of happy about the results of this.
Do you study like optical illusions, or like how is it more instinct and gut feel, or do you ever do research, or do you keep up to date with?
Well, yeah. I read few books from Kellett and then from Browning as well. So basically, I've been following Terrapin by then. So
and I have to say Katie Orion as well, who's the partner of it. But
that's right.
Exactly.
Well, of course. But I've been following the company and the consulting practices, publications, and so on. I always found it fascinating. And they are the pioneers on the subject, so I had to follow them.
Amazing.
So also at the top floor, the 11th floor, we created this massive terrace. Again, we started working with the client, because if you can imagine an office building, you will tend to maximize the footprint and the lettable areas. But the client agreed to create this enormous terrace that creates outdoor space for casual meetings outside, and incorporate a landscape for enjoyment and also to enjoy the views of London from an amazing privileged location.
Because it is amazing, talking about reeds and the reason I ask about optical illusions is, basically we're simple creatures, right? We feel through our senses, our hormones change our mood. And if you can understand that, then you can change the experience of human beings in the built environment. I think we're in a really interesting stage of design where we're understanding that we pushed the boat too far. We now have to go back to nature. I mean,
Absolutely.
even Apple Studios, or Apple shops. I was in the Apple store in Stratford, West London the other day.
Yeah.
And I was being a lighting guy. I was complaining about the poor rendering. I was like, I can't see any of the colors of the phone, or whatever it might be. And then I was speaking to the guy that was getting my laptop repaired, and I was like, "What's up with these lights?" He was like, "Honestly, we're at iteration 7. So apparently Apple, they have stage 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So they're up to 7." And that means that the branding of every store when they upgrade it, interior design-wise, to stage 7, is silver, spaceship silver with bright blue and all that. And they've realized they've gone too far. So the iteration 8, which is the next wave of them doing refurbs of the Apple stores, is wood, tree. So I think it's interesting, even with COVID, after... we all now know that we've pushed it too far. And even Apple is suddenly going, yeah, we agree. And as a tech company, are stripping back to basics. But there is this interplay, really, of... we have modern technology that allows us to analyze the brain, do optical illusion investigations, working out, stripes versus patterns and stuff like that. And I find that a lot of it is just proving what we already know to be true instinctively. Do you know what I mean? Like mimicking the patterns of...
Yes.
But we're able now, I think, to put the science behind
biophilic
design structures that people can maybe implement and benefit their spaces a little bit more.
Yeah, completely right.
But the whole perspective of it's a plant inside a kitchen is the trend that we're trying to break, where it's so much more than that. It's about hormone and
it's not just about plants.
Exactly.
Although plants do help.
Yeah, probably the most famous of the traits.
Yeah.
I mean, see, you've done projects from Uzbekistan to villas in Mauritius, urban master planning in St. Petersburg, office towers in China. How differently do they apply biophilic design? Are there some cultures or countries that maybe are further ahead or a little bit less interested in it and more about?
Yeah, it was always fascinating to
function.
see how different cultures relate to the surrounding natural environment. And for the Chinese culture, in a way, there's a lot of, it's very similar to the Japanese in certain ways. It's quite, they tend to have outdoor spaces that are quite intimate, surrounded by walls and like a wall garden, so in the middle of the courtyard and of the house, which is quite interesting, that approach. But then also I find it fascinating how some of the concept they have about the relationship between indoor outdoors are based on very ancient traditions or philosophies, like for instance the feng shui, which is at the moment for me it sounds quite alien when I had to start working.
We
with
have
some of the
later in this series. I'm speaking to a feng shui
really?
expert as well, because I'm fascinated. I know very little about it, but it's.
So we did one project in Uzbekistan that the client, one of the conditions was to apply a lot of feng shui rules. So we had to have a feng shui consultant on board, and for me it was like an added element I had to consider. But then I started learning about it, and I started to make sense of a lot of the requirements. And actually, some of them are actually pure biophilic design principles there and then, because they make a complete.
Again, it's that instinct, isn't
it?
From
It's
Greek
purely
to
interesting.
now
to
Apple
right.
reverting back. We have that sensor. We just have to tune in a bit.
No, I find it fascinating at the end of the process. Yeah, having learned this and making the connections, and some of them make complete sense. Yeah.
I think it's also funny because I'm redoing my kitchen at the moment, and normally I just walk in, I go, that paint looks good, fine, we'll just paint it, done.
That's right.
And it's such a, but I've now said, right, I need to practice what I preach a little bit. I'm going to do a mood board. I'm going to get the aged textures and finishes and depths of finish, etc.
Yeah.
And I've done a mood board, and now I'm like, okay, this now really looks. I feel how important is this, because stopping and reflecting on the emotions and feelings and needs in the space is kind of, for me, seeming like, if you're applying the patterns, you're kind of fast tracking the guidance of ultimately just taking a breath and working out, biophilic design. Do you think that biophilic design could, in a sense, just be really taking stock of what you need in a space? And do you think it would come naturally, or how well do the patterns support a building looking and functioning as best as it possibly can, compared to just thinking about it deeply?
I think we will get there eventually at some point. I think that we will get to a point that biophilic design is completely embedded in what we do, and it will be a result of, rather than us trying to impose it. I think probably with the advent of AI, we can probably start modeling not just the performance of the building, such as the thermal performance or the lighting even, or the ventilation, but also we can model how the space responds to patterns and the quality of the space. I've always been fascinated by how to quantify the quality of the space. It's easy to qualify it. So we're all wired in and already programmed to enter a space and see, okay, feels cozy, it feels homely, or or there's a sense of reverence to the space. But then it's very difficult to quantify how good is the space or the quality of it is. So that's something I've always been fascinated to achieve that moment. It's a moment when you design a house for a client, and you went through a long process of months or sometimes years. The client moves in. There's a moment, it's a switch. When the client moves, this is not a house anymore. This is a home. And that moment is when we are all programmed again to imbue with meaning or significance to a inert object like a house. Also, we can do that to a natural element, but to a house we can do that, or a building. So I always find it interesting how to do that and how easily it is to qualify and how difficult it is to quantify.
It's almost when the soul meets the space, right? It's quite a corny sort of thing
Yeah,
that pops into my head.
yeah,
But that moment where you actually, like Avatar, where you literally connect that vein to the dragon, or
Yeah.
it's like that moment where, when you rent a house as well, in
Yeah.
particular, you have brilliant white walls, one of the only colors not found in nature, which
Yeah.
we've decided to paint our entire planet with. You have bright lights, you have flat surfaces. It doesn't feel like a home. And when you move into a place, it's either been done up by an owner with a lot of
Yeah.
care, or you go to someone's house or a space where it feels
That's right.
tranquil and calm. You do feel that different, and your soul lifts
Completely.
Which is,
Yeah. And sometimes you don't know why.
yeah,
Because it's not conscious. Because basically, with the way we perceive, and that's part of the studies done not long ago, actually, we are constantly scanning the space around us. I mean, it's not just the visual, but it's also the smells, the air moving around us, the textures, and so on. So, with that all affecting our neural perceptions systems in our brains. So that's the key to unlock how the space feels, basically. And if we can control it, we can design better, I would say. Yeah.
Well, I know a big part of your project also is lighting. Obviously, me being a lighter, I mean, the reason I'm on this journey, right, and my brother and I are so passionate about all things light is because of just how much it affects the mood, right? It's you dial blue light into a space in the evening and it can put you on edge. But that, you saying that sometimes you walk in, you just feel that a room feels really beautifully lit. Your projects, there's a real consideration of lighting throughout the scope. Right. So stage 3, Reba stage 3 really, or 4, even when you're conceptualizing, it feels like you're building the light into the architectural features. And that magic moment where you walk into one of your spaces, which I have done, it feels somehow ethereally glowing and you can't quite put a finger on why it works. Yeah. But how important do you think lighting is to the emotional state of that connection that you say you sometimes feel that you can't explain?
It's fundamental. We cannot disassociate light and space. They are together. This is no other way. Obviously, we have natural lights. We need to control the natural light. And we know the ways how we can do it. But artificial light, we can probably replicate or mimic some of the natural light benefits, combining direct and indirect lighting, that's as a minimum. And we incorporate that in our projects as a basic standard from the very early stages. Then we can go even further and then trying to mimic even the path of the light during the day and align it with the circadian rhythm. And then, but that is a fantastic thing to do. Then also the light is very important to define the space as well. So we use light to create pools of light to create subspaces in the space, mainly when we have an open plan or an office space. So we can identify different spaces to accentuate the character of gathering character of that space, so stimulate or sort of suggest that to the users, a certain use. The same thing to accentuate the circulation space and differentiate them from the spaces more secluded ones. And also we use light to create hierarchy for different spaces and to create interest as well, with contrast with lights and shadow and so on, which is what we need to create sort of this sort of what it's called in biophilic design terms they call it neural nourishment, which sounds a bit corny again, but I think is so.
But it is also, it's kind of visceral. You can feel it. Like I always say, I did a post the other week on LinkedIn that was all about exactly that. So SIBC, who write the rule book on how we should light, the Society of Light and Learning have the sort of final say.
Right.
And they say you need to create lighting that lifts the soul. But what happens is you end up with people who have not enough time, too many things to think about. They go, all right, let's make sure that the only requirement of 500 lux, which is 2.5 times what you need in a gymnasium, we tend to go, oh, but that's what we need, right? Bang, let's paint the whole thing in 500 lux. So we're overlighting spaces and not having the contrast. But if you think about going to a play and having a single spotlight on an actor standing or actress standing on a stage, that's where the magic happens, where all the hairs on your neck stand up.
Right.
And it's,
it's absolutely right.
And you said that neural nourishment, for me, that's the difference, right? And it's also texture, right? You know, lighting right up against the wall, when you then graze that texture, instead of putting lights around a room, lighting the floor, grazing the texture on a wall has been proven when your visual cortex processes texture, it actually, texture is nice, it's nourishing for our brain. You can see it lighting up more in an MRI machine.
Yeah. That's right.
We're flattening the world, really, and it's that neural nourishment that we need.
So we also work with natural light in this similar way, because we try to avoid, say, for instance, roof lights. When we have a house and we have an extension, say, at the rear, sometimes clients want to populate the ceiling with roof lights everywhere. We try to minimize or avoid it altogether if possible, because basically the quality of the light coming from the sky directly, in a way, is not an inviting quality light. Is quite white, quite blue. In a way, it almost replicates fluorescent light. And then we try to get light coming obliquely or horizontally that is already bounced off.
How do you do that?
Well,
with mirrors and stuff, or is it?
We just basically try to avoid it, or basically we tilt the roofs somehow to create lights coming horizontally or laterally
and bouncing down into.
It's already bounced off, because it's already bouncing off from different parts of the environment. So it's already tinted, and that gives you the quality and interest you want to achieve. And then also we can wash walls, so we can wash ceilings rather than coming directly on top of you. So basically, and it's difficult to control glare as well. That's another aspect of light, that we need to have good lit space, but controlling glare, which is fundamental.
Well, this is also where, the indirect, I think one of the most beautiful projects in London is Granary Square.
Yeah,
because
I agree
all of it, it's stunning. Whenever people say, I'm in town for a bit, can you tell me somewhere that's pretty well lit that I can go and just show my clients that I brought with? And I'm always Granary Square. It's King's Cross, then go to Dishoom, have a curry. But it's indirect lighting under the benches in a small quantity, because I think we can see a candle a mile away in pitch black. We don't need much light in the evening. And then having it orange and nice and soft and not, the fact that blue light has the same amount of cortisol in it as a double espresso.
That's right.
And that's what our modern light sources are made up of. So in the evening, we don't want coffee. Some people do after a meal, but that's to get yourself home, because you're so knackered after 3 courses. But
I remember reading, I think in your book, the book you wrote, or in one of your talks, it was this very interesting fact that I didn't know, that in our eyes we have like a second clock, basically, in a way. We have this
otoretinal ganglion cells.
Retinal ganglia. It doesn't help us with the vision at all, but it's regulating and giving us regulating our mood, our memory, and how alert we are. And I found that fascinating.
But we only discovered that recently as well, right? So I think this is actually the purpose of the podcast, right? Is to start really speaking to. I'm a lay individual, right? I'm not an expert in anything. I've put an assortment of really interesting, amazing subjects and knowledge into a book that's my favorite pub facts about light, vision, color, surface, texture, how the body works, how we evolve.
That's right.
And very openly hold my hand up and say, I don't really know what I'm doing, but I'm trying to have a chat.
I think you do.
A little bit, getting more of an idea. But talking to people about, this, and I think we need to be more open about the fact that we don't really know, and we're only really understanding more and more about the brain and the eye and our bodily responses to stuff recently. I mean, I think it was only in the 90s where we discovered this cell, which for listeners is interphotoretinal ganglion cells.
That's right.
It's on the retina, just in front of the retina, and it's a blue wavelength hits it from the sun or an LED light source, and it tells your body it's daytime. So your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure goes up, like an engine starting for the day. You're of waiting. You get on with your day, so you can hunt and gather and do all that stuff. But when we're sat in the evening and we're trying to relax and unwind, and you've got an overhead light source that's blue, with no texture, everything's flat, we've got brilliant white walls and all these unnatural things, our bodies are getting sicker and we're enjoying spaces less and less and less. So what I find really interesting about your projects in particular, and the difference between the good and the great projects, honestly, in my opinion, is the light. So I always say, obviously I'm biased, right? But this is why I ended up getting so inspired on this sort of like mission to try and educate people about it. Because if you think about an amazing space and you're looking at it, you can almost through your eyes, you can smell the room, you can hear the room, you can, kind of everything. It helps you apply your other senses. Turn the lights off and all that disappears.
Yeah.
So your projects or projects where lighting designers are used, and ideally used early enough to get involved in stage 3 or 4 of the REBA process when you're putting a building at concept stage, means you can start doing what they do in Granary Square, what you do in your project, which is hiding tiny LED strip, which is an amazing new technology, or putting down lights or up lights or floor lights in areas where we're just doing little pops on the architectural features that you want to show off, like a single spotlight on a stage and that actor that's really needing to be told the story of. That's where the magic happens. And it's, the earlier and more intricate the lighting is brought into the architectural space, I think that's that magic wow moment for me that's so easy to get but so overlooked, personally. So after my little spurt about all things light, who inspires you? Who inspires you? Who inspires you on your projects, past, present?
Yeah, past, present. I think talking about biophilic design, I think Kenzo Kuma is one of the architects I do follow. I had a chance to visit one of his works in Tokyo last year, and it was absolutely fascinating. It's in Tokyo. It's the Cheers Information building, and with the connection to nature and the use of natural materials and light, it's just truly fascinating. Yeah, it's. But then I also like to think back as I learn more and more about biophilic design. I look back at these big architects, like as I mentioned before, Frank Lloyd Wright or Alvar Aalto, and how they apply all of these concepts intuitively and to the detail. And it's not just about lights, it's about, or not just about the form finding, but also about the details and textures and colors. I keep discovering new things all the time about the old architects. Yeah,
that's the joy of it as well. I think, curious mind. You just never. I mean, it can be exhausting because you realise this journey can never end. But that's also a beautiful thing. Right? So I mean, there's this wild fact which kind of is quite bleak, but also pretty impressive. So we spend an average of 79 years of our life indoors now, which is less than 1 hour outside a day. So we spend Ty Farrow, who's a bit of a I look up to his work massively. He related that we spend more time indoors than whales spend underwater, which is insane.
That's incredible.
Yeah, so they spend more time up getting air than we do getting air ourselves outside.
It's incredible. Yeah,
it's crazy. So I mean, architects design our modern day habitats among interior designers and lighting designers. But do you think education institutes focus on human biology and human psychology and human behavior, etc., as much as they should do?
Well, I think that the schools of architecture, I think for sure they focus too much on the psychological aspects or emotional aspects, say the influence of color on the emotions and so on. But I think it's true. I think they should go a bit further than that. There is a huge scientific pool of information available. Probably it's not structured, but is there because we tap into it all the time. And I think they should investigate a bit more and trying to extract scientific information to inform the design process. Yeah.
So what's the most mind-blowing thing you've learned about human behavior and the way that we interact with the spaces that we design?
Probably when I was working in the early 2000s, working on school projects, there was a big program in the UK under the Private Finance Initiative, replacing obsolete school buildings for new builds. There was quite an interesting pool of information coming from America at the time about research on the performance, academic performance of some of the students, where they have a direct connection to nature, variable ventilation, natural ventilation, and good coloring of the lights. So we apply those concepts on the projects. We work together with different stakeholders, head teachers, teachers and so on. In the schools, they were quite problematic basically at the time. And so basically we in a way, we experimented, all of us, and the results were fascinating. So basically, were mind blowing. So to the point that the whole behavior changed for the students. So basically, the academic performance and the cognitive performance enhanced significantly, and the adaptive behavior changed. And that's something I learned, that how for us humans, basically, it's so important to have this direct connection to nature. As you were saying earlier, we live too much of our time indoors. And even for the students, the adaptive behavior we take for granted. For instance, personal hygiene, how to function in society, how to sit at a table. That's something we learn, but it's basic to function in society on a day-to-day basis. That's not taken for granted. It's not easily acquired by people who are, or children who are not in direct contact with nature. It doesn't click. It's similar to what happens to, say, animals in the zoo, that they are in a non-natural environment. They behave in a weird way. But then as soon as you take them to a natural environment, then they start behaving as they should.
Well, there is this expression as well where we put more consideration into the zoos we design for animals
probably,
than we do the habitats for humans. Like houses or restaurants, whatever.
No, that's right.
What sort of buildings? You've got kids. What sort of buildings would you, if you could change all the buildings that we live in as human beings, what kind of buildings would you like your kids to interact with when they grow up? Like if you could paint the world in a way that, every single space that is our modern habitat, i.e. the built environment, what would you want that roughly to look like in the context of your children, when they grow up?
It's a big question. But I would say that in the ideal world, probably utopian world, there will be buildings that are not based on self-referencing approaches of the design.
What do you mean by that?
Well, basically, they are focused on the humans, focus on the well-being, and not trying to celebrate, say, a style or an approach. Say, if it is a technological, high-tech building, it's not just standing there celebrating the high-tech aspects of its components. It's there to celebrate humans and the way they live, and providing well-being and stimulate. But I think for me, buildings, and that's what with Lindsay, we have this approach for architecture, that is not just to achieve a passive response to a brief, is to have an active response to a brief. So the buildings should be there also stimulating you, so healing you, even restoring you. And then it has to be, that's where I think my kids will be happy to live in.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, this is it, right? Because again, we go back to the plant in a kitchen scenario of like, it is about spatial layout, tall, open, double height ceilings to give yourself an awe-inspiring view. Religious buildings do that amazingly well. Yeah. That spine tingling, hair raising.
That's right. Yeah.
Drama of a space that excites you. But then also having dropped cozy spaces where you can get your refuge and protection and feel like you're not going to be eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. That kind of stuff. But then it's the color psychology is also really interesting to me as well. I think we are in a world where everything becomes in vogue, and you go to 100 houses that all have brass and dark blue because at the time that's the popular thing. And then I've asked people before, I'm like, did you choose this? And they're like, no, it looks cool though, doesn't it? I'm like, it looks cool, yeah, but like, would you have done that if it wasn't on the front cover of House and Garden?
That's right.
No, I probably wouldn't. I'm like, well, where's you in this room that you're spending every single day and evening, and this habitat that you're living in? So I think it's funny. It's kind of switched. Well, actually, I guess talking about the blue buildings with brass doorknobs and that being the popular thing. What's the one trend in architecture right now that you think is really overrated?
Well, yeah. So I think overrated would be any trend that is, as I said before, is self-referencing. It's like, for instance, postmodern architecture, or sort of even Art Deco, which keeps coming, and this is decorative more than anything. It doesn't give you
living in a gallery.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I suppose anything that is self-referencing or self-celebrating is it should be overrated, and I think it is. Yeah, I think people are more and more focused on or value more well-being, understand well-being more.
It's funny because actually, no matter what, humans will always happily go back to that. You know, if you have a holiday and you go to like a little cottage that has one stove, 2 armchairs, a fireplace, wood outside, and a bed.
That's enough.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? That is actually the timeless habitat which just nourishes, and it's just
that's right.
You know, it's heaven. Yeah. So it is quite telling that it will stand the test of time.
Yeah.
And there's an amazing book called The Eyes of the Skin, which argues that modern buildings have lost their sensual stimulation because we design too much on screens. You know, we're literally doing CAD, you know, on our iMacs or our iPads and all that. I mean, do you agree? How do you bring that sensory richness back into your work when you're? I mean, are you sketching? Are you drawing? Are you getting real materials from the space? Are you getting like mud from the source and putting it in? You know, how do you ensure that you put the texture into the space?
I haven't read the book yet, but I will read it after this, and then I completely agree with this. There's something we try to force ourselves in the office, in the studio, and not to rely completely on the computers, on the screen. I think it's a missed opportunity not using pen and paper or pencil and paper. There's an interaction between the eye and the act of drawing or applying ink or charcoal on a piece of paper, because the drawing itself suggests other things, invites you to explore other ideas, the ideas you didn't know that you were going to have. I think when designing on a screen, because of the mechanics of it, is a more linear process, doesn't allow you to branch off on unexpected paths. And then it's a huge missed opportunity. So we tend to stick to pen and paper, at least on the early stages of the concepts.
So how do you keep the sensory experience throughout a space on any budget? Can you do cost-effective version of biophilic design? Can you be ultra luxury? Sure, because there's a lot more budget, but are there ways where you can just keep that enriching, or was it neural nourishment going into the space using any budget?
So yes, so the answer is yes. We do apply from the beginning. We're trying to speak with the clients, and it is in our website, so we're trying to explain with clients from the beginning when we do the brief that we want to apply those principles. Sometimes these principles are not very well understood, but we are confident as the project progresses that the clients will buy into it. So basically the thing is, biophilic design principles, some of them, as I said, they're already there. Basically, we already been applying them for a long time, for probably thousands of years. For instance, even the layout itself of a house or a building, it could be biophilic if we treat it as a journey with secluded areas, creating surprise effects and destiny points, and then to give us a clarity of entrance, a wayfinding, to control how calm we are and control our adrenaline as we go through a space we don't know yet. Also, the controlling of the natural light. As I said before, then we can control some details, the relationship between, say, the windows or the doors to the ceiling heights. Sometimes we create like a buffer in between a big extension to the windows to capture that relationship between sky views from the sitting areas or the relaxing areas. So there are a lot of tricks we can incorporate embedded in the fabric of the building itself. That don't require a new system to be incorporated into it.
Have you found you've seen a marked improvement in client satisfaction since you've been incorporating biophilic design?
It is huge. Yeah, we can see that. We can test it and we can see it.
I'd love to hear that. That was a tense moment.
But it still is very empiric in a way, because we are, as I say, we are tapping to the back of this sort of pool of scientific information we have to find, which is no structure out there, but there are places that you can get that information, and then we apply it and we can see how it works, and then we get the feedbacks after that. We are very rigorous in trying to get feedback from our projects.
Do you have to convince them quite hard, like this whole self-referencing I saw this on the front cover of Modern Home, Modern House. I want that in my house. I want to live in a gallery because when my friends come around, they can see that I'm very sophisticated, etc. Do you ever have to convince them that maybe there could be a nicer way, or do they tend to come to you saying, "I love what you do. Can you implement it?" And
I think it's a bit of both. I think they can see that we've done it before, so there's some element of trust, which helps a lot. So we don't have to invent the wheel every time. But then, so we work with a lot of options and a lot of iterations, and we're trying to invite the clients to understand that they are not buying a product from us; they are buying a process. So they have to be part of the process. And once they understand that, then it's easier to have this communication, this dialogue, and educate the client in certain aspects they don't know, because sometimes it's the first project they ever done with an architect, probably will be the last one as well, mainly in domestic projects. But we have to be conscious as well that when it's domestic projects, sometimes the clients are investing everything they have or they will ever have on the house. So we have to be quite responsible on that. But they understand that there's an ultimate vision there that goes beyond achieving a nice house that could be sold for more money. So basically, we want to achieve a space, as I said before, which is more responsive and nourishes you and heals you in a way.
So how important is lighting in bringing your architectural ideas to life? Do you think lighting designers are potentially undervalued in the industry?
Completely. I think lighting designers are completely undervalued, and mainly for residential projects, because proportionally the loss is greater because the value they could add is enormous. Mainly for refurbishments of houses where we are not in control of the layout. We have to deal with what we got, the structures we have. Lighting could resolve a lot of problems and but sometimes we have a large open plan area, it can be quite anodyne in a certain way. But then with the lighting, we can emphasize certain spaces. We can define circulation from more calm dining areas and more sort of stimulating sitting areas and more functional kitchen areas. So basically, we can resolve all of that with light. Some of the clients understand the value of it. Some other ones don't. But as I said before, we always try to resolve as a basic approach is to resolve first of all the natural light, to get it right, where the lights come from and so on. So then artificial light, we can balance between indirect and direct lighting to replicate natural light, and ideally we can incorporate a lighting designer on board, and that's when magic happens.
Can you give an example of a project where lighting has completely transformed the space?
Yeah, we did a restoration and conservation project for a 1960s house in Asia, and then we worked with an amazing lighting designer called Claire Spellman, and then we created a space that was a lot better than it would have been without a lighting design, because basically it's an enormous, large open plan area with a very low ceilings. And then the question was how to subdivide the space and the dining area from seating areas. There are 2 lounges, and it's almost like an art gallery inside. And this, so the way we did that with lights without having any glare whatsoever on any of the spaces, and that's what we managed.
What color was it? You just have them black inside or gold?
It's black inside,
which is often because people go, when the lights are off, I'll see black holes in the ceiling.
You don't see it.
Literally, it's one of the most frequent things that we have to explain is actually white reflects all the light, black absorbs.
That's right.
So when the lights are on, you get no
all the inserts were black. Yeah, I remember that. And then it was a fascinating project because we managed to achieve everything we wanted, all the hierarchy of the different spaces and the subordination of certain spaces with respect to circulation, emphasizing the art with the right coloration for these very expensive pieces of art. And then, so we got it right on that way. And then the collaboration was fantastic. And I mean, you've worked on so many
amazing projects around the world, like multi-sport stadiums, hotels, schools, multi-villa compounds, world-renowned offices. What's the first thing that normally gets cut in a budget?
Probably lighting.
Perfect.
It's probably the finishes materials, because of the huge impact they have in the cost plan, which is a shame, because basically that's how we control the tactile element of the project. Together with light and acoustics and ventilation. That is all the elements that recreate the natural environment. And then, finishing materials, unfortunately, gets cut. Although for large projects, we tend to work with good cost consultants. So basically, the cost cutting exercise actually becomes a value engineering project. So we can reprioritize elements. Now we are working on a very interesting project. It's a restoration and refurbishing of an old brewery in Clapham. We are refurbishing and achieving 5 different offices. We went through a value engineering process, and the lighting stayed as originally designed, hasn't been touched. The client knows that that's a priority and embraced it. And we are very proud of it.
How frequently is it where people go, the lighting is vital? Because so often people will spend, a whole chunk of money on a kitchen refurb, and they'll put lights in that replicate an iPhone torch.
It's a huge missed opportunity, yeah. But more and more we have clients that from the early conversations, they said lighting is important for them. And we're trying to hold on to that as much as possible, because we know how important it is. It's key, yeah.
So the world is changing obviously really fast. We've got AI. How do you see architecture adapting to survive or even thrive in the next 50 years? Are you planning on integrating AI? How do you see it sort of playing into the industry?
Yeah, we are already integrating AI in our design process in a way. And then it's been fascinating. It's taking us for unexpected routes in a way, so which is quite encouraging. But I think from what discussion we're having about biophilic design and sustainability and so on, then I think AI could be a great help, and it will make design, I think, more affordable and better and more enjoyable. Because basically, if you think about it, the design process is long and it's expensive and is iterative. And sometimes we go through dead ends and we have to come back. The client had to invest a lot of time and money to get to a point that the project can be actually effectively costed. And that had to be retrofit back into the system and sometimes redesign in certain aspects and so on. So basically, I think AI will give us this idea to have a real-time model in which we can model not only the thermal performance or the ventilation performance, but also the cost performance of the build of the project and all the iterations, and including biophilic design aspects. So it's how we feel about the space and the quantification of that point I was making earlier, how to quantify the quality of it, which is key. And then I think that will help us to have AI to do all of this legwork in a way and give us time to focus on the important parts of it, which is, what the outputs are. How do you want to live with your family? How do you see your kids growing in this house? And what happens after? So it's all of that, which is the important bit, rather than focusing.
So more sort of, I guess, freeing up time or freeing up the mind when you've got a creative block. You go, okay, well, this is kind of what I'm after. Can you just take the reins from it and you go, continuation?
That's right. Yeah. It's just, I think that's what I'm very optimistic about that. Probably too optimistic, but I think it could go that way.
Definitely mixed at the moment. Some people are like, get rid of it. Absolutely not. It's going to take jobs. It's going to do this, but it may change the way that we perform our jobs. Like that film, was it Charlie and the Chocolate Factory? I think. Is it? So I think is it Wall-E? Is it when the robots take over his dad's job and then he ends up repairing the robot? There will be maybe new jobs created.
Yeah.
So what's the coolest thing in nature you've copied or would like to copy to solve a problem in one of the designs?
Back in the 1990s, actually, it was we did a project for a church in Uruguay by the coast, and we took as a reference It's a clam type of thing, a live climb. And then the idea was to how to achieve this small chair to have this sense of awe, but at the same time the sense of protection and being secluded in a protected space. I think the idea of the clam semi-open at the top gave us both. And I think it was very interesting to work with structural engineers because at the end of the day, the structure itself has to mimic in a way the structure of the shell itself. So so we were very happy with that project.
It's amazing some of the problems it can solve. So biomimicry, mimicking the shapes found in biology. So Michael Paulwin, who does a lot on biomimicry, he did a similar thing where he needed to get light into a project, and budget cuts meant that he couldn't use artificial light. So he looked to nature and found this amazing, I think it was a mollusk or a clam or something as well. And it's shaped in such a way that it uses... it's shaped in a way that optimizes the dazzling effect when trying to attract a mate on the inside of the shell. So it reflects light really efficiently.
Yeah, of course it does. Yeah,
so
it washes all the way.
Exactly. So the curvature of it was so perfectly evolved, 34 billion years or whatever it is of evolution, to bounce light around that mimicking that shape in the structure. When they ended up saving like 20% energy in the building because it was so efficient. So you ended up with more light, natural light, which is obviously the perfect formula. In higher quantities as well. So is there a project that's pushed you to your absolute limits, like you were questioning your life choices by the end of it?
I think probably a project I've done in Central Asia, and then it was good because it was a bit of a catalyst. It's just a project that the brief didn't require any sustainability or any environmental aspect. The condition was actually not to apply any of those conditions or parameters. It was in a very impoverished area, and we were talking about a palace practically. So basically, at some point, yes, I was questioning what I was doing there. So I didn't see the end of it, but so it just was against everything I believed on.
The moral compass kicked
that's
in.
Right.
Well, good for you for doing that. So if you could design a building with no rules, no budget, no regulations, no obligations, what would you create? How would biophilic design play into it? I mean, what would your ideal space look like? I think I will work on probably in a mountain refuge. That's what I think would be ideal. Is that the retirement palace or something?
Probably. Well, it's just the idea of being able to choose the space first, the location first, like the classic Greeks used to do before designing or building any construction. They would find a place that has a spirit, or they call it the spirit of the place, which is a good combination of close proximity, good views, and long distant views, and there's something protected or cozy about it. And then they design all of these amazing palaces and temples and theaters, but they are all subordinated to the overall landscape. And I think that's a fascinating thing to do, being able to choose a place where to build something. I will design a mountain refuge by a lake where you can enjoy nature.
So really, I was not expecting you to answer like that. I thought it was going to be, I guess it'd be shaped like this or whatever. But actually, bringing it back to the basics of what's your starting point? Like really, that is
I think
not easy for living in London.
No,
you're basically in between a Sainsbury's and a co-op or so. You know what I mean?
Right.
You're stuck with the choice that you've got.
Well, you asked me, no constraints. So
100% dream big. Dream big. So I always finish as well just by asking this question. If you can give me one fact about light or neuroscience or neuroaesthetics, biophilic design, human behavior, any fun facts that might spring to your mind that you think people might be interested in?
Fascinating things about this is probably what I mentioned earlier about this sort of retinal ganglia that we have, and then it regulates and hacks our brains, basically. And I found that fascinating. And that would be one of the elements that makes us perceive the space without us knowing that we do that. I think that is fascinating.
The unconscious.
The unconscious portion of it, which is fundamental. Yeah. And I think it plays a key role on the design process. all of these biophilic design principles and so on, but in a way they are already being, I know we are talking about the intuition and so on, but it's already been trying to sort of step into the regulatory framework in a way, because with the neurodiversity, if you think about neurodiversity, it's sort of an enhanced or a very sensitive sensory approach to certain factors, like say light and acoustics and air and space and so on. So basically, there have been studies focused on neurodiversity, pioneered or championed by companies like Bureau Happle, for instance. And then there's already a British standards public accessible specification called PASS 6463 is already in place. It's like a guidance for best practice when designing for neurodiverse or neurodivergent people. That means takes into account very biophilic design principles like glare, light glare, acoustics, control, the layout, how it works with the circulation, proximity to secluded areas, and so on. So if we think that between 20 to 15% of population is neurodivergent, and we are designing for them, there's no reason why we should be applying all of these biophilic design principles everywhere.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because in neurodiversity, a lot of the conditions are sort of hypersensitivity to things.
That's right.
Perhaps is a bit more of a sort of raw, honest explanation of what the human soul is experiencing.
That's right.
Maybe dialed up a bit, but maybe with a little bit less self-reflection to perhaps soothe what the body is truly trying to tell us.
That's right.
So I find quite interesting. I mean, someone said this to me the other day, the term on the spectrum. It's like, well, actually, there is an element of you being able to truly show the spectrum of how we are feeling, the full glory of interactions that the body's having. Yeah, well, it's been so awesome talking with you. I've absolutely loved it.
No,
it's so interesting.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing your knowledge and time and everything. And Pablo,
thank you
so much.